Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henrik Bick. I'm a member of the communications team here at MusicBiz. Here to welcome you all to our webinar hosted by BeatDAP. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes for you. In case you'd like to connect with one another in the chat, be sure to change your chat settings to everyone. That will allow you to network with one another. And if you have any questions for today's presenters, you can drop them in the dedicated Q&A box and we'll get them at the end of today's session. And before we get started, I just have a couple of quick notes related to MusicBiz. Our next webinar will be hosted 2 weeks from today on February 23rd with Orpheum. We've had a number of announcements on MusicBiz 22 happening at the JW Marriott Nashville, May 9th through the 12th. Including the announcement of our new crowdsourced Busy Awards program. For MusicBiz members, visit musicbiz2022.com for full event information, but also to nominate members of your community for some of the good industry-related and philanthropic mental health, wellness, and holistic works that your fellow members have done through the past years. We're really excited to nominate folks who are not just doing good in the industry, but doing good for one another as well. So be sure to check that out. We also announced that John Platt from Sony Music Publishing will be delivering one of our main keynotes at MusicBiz 2022. And Sony Music Entertainment's Julie Swidler will receive our presidential award as well. The Busy Awards and our awards dinner will happen on Wednesday, May 11th, also at the JW Marriott. But now, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to former streaming exec and independent business advisor, Adam Parnas, who's going to lead today's conversation with the co-founders of BeatDAP, Andrew Beatty and Morgan Hayduck. Gentlemen, glad to have you all here. Take it away.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining, and thanks to Henrik and the MusicBiz Association for hosting, and hope to see many of you in a few months at MusicBiz in Nashville. So for today's webinar, the subject is Mo Money, Mo Problems, and we're going to be talking about music streaming fraud today. So let me give you a quick background. So music streaming is expected to reach 1.2 billion paid consumers and generate 75 billion in revenue by the year 2030. With hundreds of DSPs and connected applications leveraging music worldwide, the digital music industry is now poised to earn the kind of massive, stable, and of course, online connected revenues that make it a prime target for fraud, just like digital advertising, e-commerce, and banking. The webinar today will present learnings from other verticals affected by fraud outside the music industry. We'll share perspectives from industry insiders, technologists, academics, and security experts from outside of music to scope the problem. They will then suggest paths that our industry can pursue to meet the expanding and evolving threat of fraud collectively and without wasted effort. So joining me today are my friends Morgan Hayduck and Andrew Beatty from the Canadian technology company BeatDAP. So if Morgan and then Andrew, if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself to the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Adam. Before we jump into ourselves, just a really quick thanks to MusicBiz for being an awesome partner and giving us this platform to speak to you all today. Also, a thank you to everyone here. It's incredible to have over 100 people spending some time with us. We know there's a lot of things you could be doing. So thanks for giving us your time. My name is Morgan Hayduck. I'm one of the co-founders of BeatDAP, along with Andrew and Poria, who's in the crowd, I think, this afternoon. My background in music, really quickly, I started my career in consulting, where I represented Music Canada, and we extended, as part of the team I was on, copyright in Canada from 50 to 70 years. So that was a great introduction to the industry. I then went into a telco and then joined a pre-IPO startup called ZipRecruiter, where I was on the growth team there, which gave me my real sort of first taste of rapid growing tech. But always wanted to come back to music, and Andrew and I go back a long way, and he also wanted to find his way back into music. And so the opportunity to start BeatDAP was too good to pass up for us. And that's how we're here today. And I'll throw it to Andrew for his quick background.
Yeah, also thanks again to everyone for putting this together. Quick background on me is five-time founder. I was everyone's weird crypto friend starting in 2011, kind of mining Bitcoin and then building a bunch of random things. I built a number of companies in different spaces, but I really started my career in entertainment and then music, really helping launch artists. Back then it was just called online marketing. I guess now it has a fancier name like growth hacking. But back in the day, mostly just trying to figure out how we could promote and launch artists for a lot of different labels and management companies. So that was my background, and Morgan and I had been talking about doing something for years. Pori and I had worked together for years, and we were just really excited to do something in music, again.
Great, thanks guys. So let's jump in. So you both started BeatDap in 2018, and over the year of working with you guys and getting to know you, obviously I've seen you have versatile backgrounds, and you could have taken on any number of interesting technological things. So let's start with you, Andrew. Tell me, why did you guys want to take on the issue of streaming fraud in the music industry specifically?
Yeah, when we first started out, actually, we were trying to improve the royalty auditing systems. We were really focused on helping labels and streaming services have a trusted layer of exactly how many times a song was played. So a lot of our focus in the beginning of our product, and still is a product for us, is around the authenticity and reporting accuracy of usage. So how many times a song was played. But in order to do that well, along the way, we realized that you actually need to know how much fraud is occurring, because oftentimes those numbers need to be removed. So you start looking at fraud in a different light. And so in a lot of ways, our audit product actually led to fraud detection itself. And then going deeper onto the fraud side of things, we realized and we came to the conclusion that there wasn't really one standardized offering or fraud detection service. Like every DSP was either trying to build it internally themselves or not doing anything at all. And it presented kind of a clear opportunity for us, given that we were already trying to champion the fight of getting the usage right, to go ahead and tackle fraud as well and try to solve that problem for the industry.
Cool. So thank you for the primer on the business. So switching to Morgan, tell us what are you going to take us through today, and what do you hope that the audience attending takes away from today's webinar?
So we're going to cover 4 sort of broad buckets. We hope you'll take a little bit away from each. The first is just a better understanding of streaming fraud as a challenge facing our industry. The first thing I'd say about it is that it's not a small problem. We validated this from sort of all corners of the industry and come at it from lots of different angles. Our view is that it's big and it's growing. And if it's left unchecked, consensus sort of estimates right now are in the 10% of all streaming activity, could be fraud if left unchecked, which would be $7.5 billion by 2030 if the industry stays on the track that it's on. And in a way, I say this sort of tongue in cheek, but it's also kind of serious. Like, it's a badge of honor for the industry that we are now big enough to be the target of fraud in some ways, because if you're going to spend the time and effort and energy to commit fraud, you're expecting a payoff. And in that sense, we're in sort of the big leagues with advertising and e-commerce and, some of the other industries that we're going to talk about today who have been targets of fraud for a long time. So that's one. The second thing, and to sort of help frame this, is just some other industries with similar dynamics that we can sort of point to learnings from. The third thing is to get in the head of fraudsters. What incentivizes them? What strategies and tactics are they deploying? And then, towards the end, we're going to look to the future a little bit and talk about one path forward, hopefully our path forward, as a platform-based approach to solving this problem. So that's really those 4 buckets today, and hope you'll grab something from each of them.
Great. So, we're going to spend a lot of time, of course, talking about music streaming, where I think, broadly speaking, imagine many in the audience will understand that there's 2 motivations, essentially attention economy and or actual financial motivation and gain. So before we, go deeper into the music business, let's start by broadening our aperture to online fraud generally, and then narrow in specifically on streaming and music. So, outside of music, obviously, there's many, but what kind of incentives in general do you see leading to online fraud and abuse?
Yeah, I think that in general, anytime that you have a business of ranking, reputation, or anyone trying to seek attention at scale, you're likely the target of fraud. So there is always some sort of incentive at scale to for the fraudulent behavior to exist. Off the top of my head, examples are that Twitter estimates that 9 to 15% of their profiles are bots. Facebook deactivated, I think 540 million fake accounts in 2018. I know for a fact that a lot of the Instagram bots hide in plain sight and sort of sit on top of celebrity accounts, and banking on the fact that Instagram won't remove followers from like major celebrities. And so they sort of, whenever there's this potential for increasing attention or for gaming a rank or increasing your reputation or your perceived clout, there's going to be fraud that kind of comes with it. And I think in music, what's interesting is that you have this direct relationship where when you listen to something, you can get paid out, as opposed to an indirect relationship where you have to build this sort of ecosystem around you or this clout around you and then commercialize that clout or that ranking or that popularity. And so it's like two-step removed in most cases. And I think what's interesting in music in this consumption-based model we have today is that it's much more direct for fraudsters to take advantage.
Got it. So then in that regard, what other industries do you feel are, most analogous to music?
Yeah, I think the easy ones are like digital advertising. Click fraud's probably the most well-known example. At one point, I remember seeing a report that showed that only 8% of the clicks were actually driven by real people behind the computers. So when you look at like click fraud as a problem, like that's crazy. You have e-commerce with identity fraud. So PayPal, for example, last week in their earnings report, in their earnings call, they disclosed that they had 4.5 million signups that were fraudulent, and their stock dropped 25%. So you have massive amounts of fraud on the e-com side. Financial services, you have money laundering, which is obviously a pretty well-known problem. You have companies I think Morgan will bring up later, probably Verifin, but you have this, a lot of money laundering issues when it comes to the financial industry itself and financial services. And I think kind of a newer phenomenon, which I think is really interesting, is online education. Like because of all the government subsidies for online ed during this pandemic, you actually have just massive amounts of fake students sign up for courses. And so there's professors out there that have like half their class is bots or fake people who are just signing up for the government subsidies and not actually attending the classes. And so again, anytime you have this sort of opportunity for fraud, it's going to exist. And these are, that's probably just a couple good examples, like a little bit off the top of the head there.
Oh, cool. So then what are each of these industries, separately doing about it?
I mean, there's a number of things, and we look, those four are great examples. We look at a bunch of industries because a lot of the tactics and strategies get recycled. It's like, multi-dimensional whack-a-mole. But so we sort of track verticals to see what's happening in other spaces. On the click fraud side, there are companies like Double Verify. They're a fraud lab. They're dedicated to finding solutions for brands and advertisers, marketplaces, and publishers. Which is, I say all four of those things because I think the dynamics are interesting. It's sort of in music, it's the artist, label, distributor, DSP sort of buckets. So again, they've sort of subdivided click fraud into the sort of four parties that are harmed, which is the same way we think about streaming fraud. In financial services, in e-commerce, there's a company like Count focused on sort of verifying identity, which if the PayPal example, sort of persists, I think there's sort of still a lot of room for improvement in that space. Verifin, which Andrew mentioned, is a good Canadian company based in Newfoundland. It was actually acquired last year. They're interesting because what they're taking is transaction level data from multiple banks. They take big bank data, they take sort of mid-sized and regional bank data, all at the transaction level, which as a unit is kind of the equivalent of a stream. And what they do is they look for patterns in that data that perhaps one bank looking at their own data alone wouldn't be able to see sort of the same behavioral fingerprint. And so, in the banking industry, Verifin's had a lot of success in that regard, and we've modeled a lot of what we do off of a similar approach. Online ed, that's almost too new of a problem for there to be a solution yet. But if anyone on the call is enterprising and looking for a fraud vertical to tackle, online ed, student bots seems like a good space. But the common thread that runs between all those examples is that they've either sort of outsourced some or all of the responsibility for fraud detection to a dedicated third party who's sort of investing in R&D and focused on solving this problem at scale and across multiple participants in the ecosystem. And so we think that's sort of an interesting thread to pull on in more developed verticals that have been challenged by the issue of fraud for longer than we have in the music industry.
Got it. Okay. So let's zoom in on the music industry and streaming fraud. So, quick background, for the attendees, size of the business right now is about 25.5 billion. Some analyst estimates are predicting that the size of the digital music industry, will be 75 billion by 2030. And obviously huge growth trajectory in the last 7 years or so after 12 years of revenue declines in the music business as a whole. So why music? Why now? Are we at that like inflection point? Tell us about why music is an increasingly an attractive target for fraudsters as a whole.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, if you think about the just the size of how much money is being paid out now, like in 2020, it was $25 billion. It'll be 75 billion by 2030. I think when you think of how big this market's growing and how much money there is, and the fact that there's this direct relationship where as a streaming farm, I can do a bunch of actions like playing music and then return money back either for clients paying me on that on their behalf, or I can make money directly, like they pay me to drive streams, like that's a one-to-one action. So it's just very direct. I either do it for this sort of attention-based, reasoning or incentive, or this financial-based incentive. But either way, every action I take, I'm being paid for that. That's much easier of a type of fraud, or a much more direct way to make money than if you have to, for example, acquire 100 million or 1 million fans on Facebook and then figure out how to monetize those fans later. And so it's a very different sort of approach. And I think that what you have is this sort of economy where you can drive that quickly. And then you have this massive bucket of money that's now being paid and growing very fast. And you have infrastructure that maybe is still early in terms of their detection capabilities, or a lot of platforms just not addressing it yet. So I think that where there's a gap, there's a way. And when there's a lot of money at stake, you'll find people willing to try and take it from you.
Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about how people are perpetuating streaming fraud across, any number of music DSPs and platforms, let's talk about the motivations, like more specifically, like why are they doing it? Let's dive in there.
Cool. So I think, in 3 broad buckets on the sort of streaming manipulation or juicing side, a fourth being kind of content fraud, which we could do a separate webinar on. So today we're going to stay in the sort of lane of juicing and manipulating the numbers. And for that, there's sort of 3 primary buckets that kind of overlap. So the first is just chasing a pure financial gain. Some of the folks on the call might be familiar with the story of the Bulgarian scam on Spotify a few years back. Really simply, it was 2 playlists with fairly generic names, soulful music and music from the heart. It was populated, both playlists, with 30-second tracks. 1,200 accounts drove all the streams. So if you think of the upfront cost of setting that particular fraud up, or sort of product up, it was $12,000 worth of premium accounts and just the technical know-how to run a bot farm, which is, to some it's a very high bar, but to people with technical capabilities, it's actually not a high bar at all. And that was able to generate between $288,000 and $415,000 a month in royalties before they were caught. So like a pretty decent ROI on your $12,000 invested. There are other examples of sites like Streamify, who basically right up front in their marketing collateral say these are all 100% legit streams that are eligible for royalties that you're buying from us, which doesn't pass the smell test from a sort of sales copy standpoint. And then taking that and just sort of putting it on steroids is, an example called Just Another Panel, which is hosted overseas. On Just Another Panel, you can buy popular DSPs streams in 10 million increments, which is just sort of a staggeringly large number. And to us says, that company and that model still persists means a non-trivial percentage of those streams are getting through the existing filters, because otherwise I don't think they'd be continuing to bulk sell them at, 100,000 to 10 million at a time. So that's the first bucket, is sort of financial return. And it flows into the next one, which we think of as like sort of gaming algorithms and inflating popularity, or the perception of popularity. So the analogy here is no different than fake reviews for products on Amazon, trying to get onto the homepage, trying to be the first product recommended. As one, if you go to another site like Streamify as SEO clerk, where you can see customer reviews of the products they've purchased. And in some cases, they leave comments, one that said, I'll pay anything to be in the iTunes top 100. I just want to be recognized for my work, and trying to buy streams that way. It's helpful when you actually get customer comments on the product online. But really what, zooming out, what that person is trying to do, and what a lot of sort of happens in this gaming algorithms and inflating popularity space, is just trying to cut through the noise of the 20,000 or so songs that are uploaded to DSPs every day. And if you want to get through that bottleneck and rise above, gaming algorithms and buying streams is a great way to do that. And the algorithms themselves are sort of ripe for this in one way, because two key factors that are employed in what sort of shows up in your personalized playlists or in the big playlists, sort of the most popular playlists on services, are your own individual tastes, but then also the relative popularity of that track on that particular DSP. And so you can imagine how pointing a bot army at a particular track and generating velocity can help to influence where that's placed, and then suddenly generates organic distribution. The third bucket are probably the most controversial, but we're going to say it anyway, is to be number one. So there are only 52 weeks a year to top the charts. There's only one most streamed artist every year. If I think Charlie Munger said, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. There's still a very strong incentive to be first. And there's, sort of the top of even at the top of the industry, there's a lot of space to bury streams within the legitimate popularity of an artist. And, we've seen that. And in fact, I'll point you to this as an example. If you go look at the Rolling Stone charts, which I think they've since discontinued, but if you go back to May 15th, 2020, and you look at their top 10 most streamed artists for that week, there's one commonality between that top 10 group. 9 of the top 10 in the top 3 most streamed cities for each of them is Glendive, Montana. And if you heard this story before, you know where this is going. Glendive has 5,000 people in it. It just doesn't make a ton of sense for a city like Glendive, or a town actually like Glendive, to be among the top 3 most listened to cities for the top 10 artists worldwide for that particular period. So we point to that as just sort of an example of the incentive to be, at the top of the pile as well, and that this sort of can permeate through all levels of the sort of career stack.
Cool. So having talked a little bit about the motivations and why people do it, let's talk tactics. How is the fraud actually perpetuated? And can you share any interesting examples that you're aware of?
Man, there's so many good examples of how fraud is perpetuated. It's I feel like, as Morgan pointed out earlier, it's like whack-a-mole. It's constantly trying to battle these guys down because they come from different angles. And a lot of what we've built for our fraud detection is really just, dozens and dozens of models that look at data in different ways and try to identify nuanced, pattern matching for fraud, so that we can dive deeper and catch them. So some examples of this, like, I'll start with the sort of older way that, let's say a couple years ago, was more prominent. You can literally send, and people do this, they send pallets of computers, like thousands of computers, to high traffic, internet traffic areas. So think hotels, coffee shops, restaurants. You can literally place these computers in multiple different cities around the United States and have one centralized command center. When you have that centralized command center, you can tell those computers with a bot, by the way, they have premium and free accounts attached to each of them, to target 6 to 8 streaming services at any one time. And the thing is, if I want to drive 1 million plays to Morgan, I can't just drive 1 million plays to Morgan. I need to create noise around Morgan so that he can hide in plain sight. So what I have to do is drive 1 million plays to Morgan while I drive 100 million plays to unsuspecting artists outside. So when a service is just looking at, oh, this IP address or this account that's premium or free is playing music, they're thinking, oh, like, it looks normal. It's in a hotel. This person might be transitory. Now you can start layering on other stuff. So you'll see people make fake tour schedules and start ramping up the plays across their networks as an artist is touring. You can mimic what they would expect to see in human behavior from like real life tour examples, but you're using literally hundreds of thousands of computers with virtual computers over the top of it to target hundreds of millions of streams for artists that you want. That's like one example. Now, if I were doing it today as a hacker, I would very much not do it this way. I mean, if there's one thing that's true, is that you can buy accounts now online on the dark web. Like, I can go on the dark web and buy PayPal, for example. I can go on the dark web and buy hundreds of thousands of people's PayPal accounts with their balances in it and start transferring money out. And the reason they sell those is that one individual hacker who hacked 200 million can't possibly access all 200 million without getting caught. So they go on the dark web and they sell pieces of that 200 million to other people so that it's harder for it to get tracked back to who actually did the hack. So when hundreds of millions of accounts are hacked, let's say Facebook sign-on or single sign-on, that's like a layer for which you can attack companies. So what you'll do is, for example, if I was building this today, I would go on, by the way, don't do this, please. We'll try and catch you. But if I were doing it today, I would literally go on the dark web and buy, let's say 50 million accounts, either social sign-on or even just Spotify accounts that have been hacked. I will then check to see how many I can get into. So I'll run a sort of a login bot and figure out how many I can actually sign in. I might only get to sign in, say 15 million or 10 million of those. So now I have, let's call it 10 million accounts to make it easy. What I'll do then is I'll sign up all 10 million accounts to an app that I make. It's a private app. I sign all the 10 million up to that app. That app uses APIs of every publicly traded, or sorry, every public streaming service has a public API for you to pull metrics out of. So you have like Apple that has APIs, you have Spotify's open API, you have all these open APIs. You start pinging every 2 hours, hey, is this account using this service? Let's say it was Spotify accounts you hacked. What are the last 50 songs they played? That'll tell you like how often they're playing. And what you can do is create a map. So I would just sit there quietly for 3 weeks watching 10 million people, quietly pinging them to figure out when are they actually listening to music and when they aren't. If you have a 2 to 3 week cluster of data, it's pretty easy to then say, okay, cool. Morgan and this other group of 2 million users never use these accounts between 12 and 2, presumably because they're at work or on lunch or whatever. We will hijack these accounts for these 2 hours. Now, instead of having to create noise for 100 million other people, Morgan's natural listening behavior becomes that noise. And so what you can do is just hide in plain sight and actually hijack someone else's account, run bots against that streaming service and or multiple streaming services with their social sign-in or their single sign-on. And you can basically run a bot scheme in plain sight that no one recognizes. And if you're a streaming service on your own, how are you going to know that this exact 2 hour window had a very similar pattern to how it was being how music was being played? Think of it like a digital fingerprint. Just like when you do biometrics, like every time you type something and you push a key down, there's you can actually type a phrase into a computer and know that that's a person based on how often they are pushing keys, how the keys are down, which keys are held. Like that becomes like a signature. And so you can do the same thing basically by looking at nuanced types of plays within an account itself and trying to figure out which accounts have been hijacked. But you can only do that if you're looking at anonymized data across all of these streaming services collectively. And I think that's where we start looking at things and saying, hey, look, our streaming fraud detection service isn't just rules-based. It's easy to catch the guy that has 100,000 phones on a wall and never leaves. It's much harder to catch the sophisticated fraud that is happening today and that we are catching today when you are just looking at your data silo and you don't even know that these things are happening. And so again, don't go build this hack I've just laid out for you as a product roadmap, but it would not be that hard. I could spin this hack up inside of 3 to 4 weeks and probably be generating hundreds of millions of plays for someone if I wanted to be Black Hat. So people are doing this. This is very real, both the physical computers and also this other version. And this is exactly what we've really set out to try and tackle. Another example is actually just regular people, like you phone tree it. You could basically use MTurk or any type of crowdsourcing platform and say, Adam, go find me 10 people. Adam goes and says, go find me 10 people. Those 10 people, go find me 10 people. And you can drive hundreds of millions of plays just from real people constantly listening. It's sort of the old click fraud model, but with streaming. So you could do that also. So there's lots of tactics that you're constantly trying to whack-a-mole down. And that's why we've built, we'll have close to 100 models this year looking at all the different types of lenses trying to combat that. But I mean, it's a wild west out there in tactics.
Right. And I guess you're saying that it's like if Well, before we talk about platform-based approaches versus individual kind of siloed approaches just by individual DSPs, let's talk about the unfortunate victims of fraud. Naturally, it's a competitive landscape out there, and artists and labels and songwriters all trying to do things legitimately and earn fans the right way and have those fans be legitimate. But why don't you deep dive a little bit, Morgan, into who this is actually hurting day to day?
Yeah, it's a good question and an important one. I think 4 of the 5 groups that I'm going to talk about are going to be clear to everybody on the call. So artists who are trying to do things the right way, songwriters, anybody on the creative side who's just trying to organically generate a following and a fan base, is fighting against this, and that's unfortunate. Labels who have to make the decision about trying to sign particular artists based on data that they have to have confidence in, and whether or not they can trust that one artist's reports are legit or not, which is a really a really difficult thing to adjudicate. I think there are lots of sort of third-party signals you can look at for help, but still it's a challenge for labels. I mean, the streaming services themselves who have content obligations, they have customers. There are a lot of sort of reasons why they want this off of their platforms. The distributors, the 4th bucket, who also put content onto streaming services and don't want to be conduits inadvertently to streaming fraud themselves. And then the last group, the thing that was interesting, I read an article a while back, and it was an interview with a fellow who actually worked in a click farm in the Philippines. His name's Alberto, and he was giving an interview talking about what his day-to-day was like doing, basically terrible, repetitive streaming activities all day, just listening to music with the sound off, for the record, or down at least very low. And just over and over and over again with daily targets that were pretty high. And if he missed the targets, he didn't get paid. But also he was subject to sort of physical abuse in the form of having his fan turned off in the warehouse that he worked in if he was behind schedule. So he would overheat, which also seems counterproductive just from a motivation standpoint, but like generally awful as an experience. And reading the article made me think about the fact that the first 4 groups of people that are sort of harmed by this are on this call today, and we're all going to talk about it collectively as an industry. Alberto and his peers are probably not. And so I think it's important we talk about them too, because there's a moral imperative in some ways to do things, that get abstracted away from sort of our collective consciousness as an industry. Because if you just dismiss streaming fraud as bots, it kind of dehumanizes the fact that there's actually a bunch of people who do this just in places that maybe aren't our own backyards.
Yeah, and I think that's important to point out that there is a beyond the goal of shifting attention between parties and pro rata models, and the same with financials, that there's a real human element to it. And it may be in faraway worlds in some points for a lot of the people on this call, but it's important to highlight. So let's talk a little bit about the best path forward and BDAP's approach to combating stream fraud. You talked a little bit before, Morgan, about if services are just operating in a silo, like no matter how good their systems are, they're not seeing the bigger picture of all these crazy things that can be going on in the world. So why, of course, aside from the fact that BDAP is building it, do you generally believe in a platform-based approach rather than individual music services, individual DSPs, each building their own bespoke solutions?
Yeah, our own, obvious bias aside, our view is that it's inefficient for any DSP of any size to be doing this alone, dedicating resources and time to sort of suppressing fraudsters because of that exact reason. Their data sets are limited to their own data and whatever third parties they pull in, but it certainly doesn't give you the picture across the whole industry. The analogy that sort of comes to us most easily is actually what sort of on-premise data storage looked like before AWS and the sort of cloud revolution, which is to say that a lot of companies whose core business was not hosting data centers had to do that to offer their product, whatever it was. And AWS came along and basically said, hey, look, don't do that anymore. We'll do it. We'll dedicate resources and time and R&D and effort and maintain the uptime of these services so you can focus on your customers and doing the thing that ultimately they pay you for. We think fraud has similar dynamics, right? It's expensive and it's resource intensive. It's tech intensive in particular, and data science intensive more than anything. And being exceptional at fraud detection isn't going to gain you, if you're a DSP, probably any net new subs. It's not going to be part of a marketing campaign. But it is important nonetheless. And the internal resources that you devote to it would probably be better off focused on differentiating yourself from your competitors and offering, unique products and services and solutions to your customers. And so that's sort of our view on why a platform makes a lot of sense. to do this is someone to sort of sit in the middle, have access to more data, and including third party, but also first party DSP data, and look for those needles in the haystack that Andrew was alluding to. Because if we are sort of the next industry that's poised to be targeted by sophisticated fraudsters and not just sort of the amateur class of people who make it really obvious and easy to catch, then we need to be out ahead of it. And I think dedicating resources to solving the problem is the way to do that. So a lot of that sounds really abstract. I saw a couple of questions or things popping up in the chat about, are we going to see the solution in action? We're not going to give you sort of the full product demo because one, that would take a long time. And two, this isn't totally an infomercial, but the good folks at Music Business were kind enough to say that we could show you a screenshot from our web app, which hopefully helps answer a couple of questions. One, what does this look like if you're an end user? And two, how does it help everybody in the industry? So I'm going to share my screen for a second here and let you see something that we haven't actually showed anyone before outside of customers and partners. So what you'll see immediately is that Nothing Left, Rome, and the album art are fictitious. We did that for obvious reasons. Everything else is actually informed by our models. I'm going to draw your attention to the score, the 87 here on the right-hand side. What this represents is, on a scale of 0 to 99, we're scoring every fraud case or every instance of streaming fraud that we detect. Below a 75, we're not going to worry about it. Above a 75, we're going to suggest either keeping an eye on that particular case or taking an action if it's really severe. In this case, an 87 is severe and we would be recommending an action. But more importantly than just giving you a score and a confidence level is what metrics, what flags are tripped that ladder up into that score. So the 5 bubbles that you see around the fraud score, those are the 5 most important flags that were tripped to get to this conclusion. And when we talk about sort of, why this matters, what I think about is like, it's one thing to say, we think this is streaming fraud and you should back it out of a sales report. It's another thing to say, here are the 5 metrics that most importantly contributed to that score being generated in the first place. And we actually want to take that a step further. So in product, if you clicked on this eye icon here, what you would get is the definition for each of those 5 metrics. And like Andrew mentioned before, we're developing dozens and hundreds soon of these metrics. So you'll have a shared sort of set of vocabulary and definitions as an industry, where if we're talking about user composition, we know that that might be a location-based trigger that says, hundreds of devices that were mobile never moved, right? The gyroscope never moved. They never had a battery life that dipped below 100%. That's indicative of a sort of a click farm of some sort. And so what we want to do really is give people the resources and the sort of vocabulary to have a conversation that is, like, we acknowledge is difficult, but do it in a way that's sort of informed and coming from a place of sort of shared understanding. And so everyone is taking similar action, and you don't have one platform out there thinking like they're leading in this regard, but are subsequently also getting the most heat from the community for being effective at detecting streaming fraud. So the spider chart here is just a nice way of illustrating it, but really we wanted to talk about the scores on the side. And so, in our mind, that's a way of both learning from the biggest data set, displaying it visually in a representative way, adding in third-party data that helps us prove or disprove our own analysis, and creating common understanding of the problem across the industry, and hopefully like shared definitions and understood methodologies, all of which contributes to like just more comfort in making decisions that we acknowledge are consequential. So that's
I'd also add that we have a pretty amazing API. So any of the larger partners we have that don't necessarily want the full web dash, we provide them the API back so that they can sort of analyze stuff on their own end. So we love visualizing stuff, but we know some of our data friends do not, and they would prefer just the APIs back. So we have a bunch of that stuff also.
That's a good point.
Cool. So how far along is BeatDAP today, and where are your goals as far as where do you hope to get by the end of the year on product?
Yeah, so right now we've been in a closed beta with a handful of large DSPs. We have 4 large DSPs that we're actively looking at this fraud for. I can't say which ones, but we've been very successful in finding fraud at a very high degree of confidence. I think 95% plus confidence that these platforms weren't catching. And in many cases, they may have had some degree of fraud detection before or not. So where we're at now is we're looking for one more beta partner to come on and have sort of preferential terms. In terms of in this closed beta, our goal would be to go full live launch in the end of this year. So we'll be able to take on more streaming services, and we'll look at commercializing that more. But as of right now, we have 4 really strong partners, and we're looking for a potential 5th one. So that's where we're at. I'm hoping by the end of this year, you know, each one of these streaming partners has billions of transactions. You're talking about like a lot of data. So they've been a really great data set so far. And I've been really excited about what Poria and Hank and the guys on our team have and the women on our team have like really made. Like they've built some incredible models, and just the amount of fraud we're catching with confidence is incredible.
Great. Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left today. So I'm going to start pivoting to some Q&A, and I see we have a couple of things that have come in. So and if, you know, those of you in the audience, if you have questions yet and haven't, you know, feel free to pop them into the Q&A tab on the bottom of your Zoom window. So I'm going to start with a question about user-centric royalties versus what largely exists in the way of how music subscription services and others pay royalties, which is basically on a pooled pro rata base. So the question specifically is, do you think that if services switch to user-centric accounting, could that solve the problem compared to the existing pro rata accounting method? And I'll add to that, could it actually potentially introduce new problems?
That's a really good question. I think I saw that one in the chat pop up from Amma. So thank you for asking. Yeah, we think user-centric is, you know, without getting into the merits of different royalty systems, it just introduces a new set of incentives for fraudsters, and that's the lens through which we look at it. So if you think about sort of the two of the buckets of ways that you might go at this, one is using bots and another is taking over accounts. I think what user-centric royalties will do is shift the incentive to creating more, or to stealing and taking over more accounts along the lines of what Andrew discussed in that sort of like the sort of taking Facebook OAuth or Spotify accounts or any other service account credentials and taking over legitimate accounts rather than spinning up bots and having them target songs. Because what you really need in the user-centric model is, you know, lots of individuals listening as opposed to bots with high volume. So it's different, and without sort of seeing what the world looks like in a user-centric royalty model, like it's hard to say, but our instinct is that it's just going to create a different set of incentives and a different sort of set of targets.
So the idea that it's not enough to have like one account or a small group of accounts with like a massive amount of plays to influence a pooled system, that you just have to take over more accounts because of the nature of what a user-centric reporting is, and that it's being, got it. So I think the answer is that it's not going to solve the problem. It could shift the problem, shift the incentive and the methods and tactics.
So they'll just move. I just saw, Adam, if you don't mind me jumping in, I know we have other questions. So I just saw a really interesting one come in the chat from Yoktan, I think, which says, have you seen cases of hostile fraud where one entity is targeting another company's catalog in order to get that company blocked, taken down from a DSP? The short answer is yes, we see that quite a bit, actually. It reminds me of the old days. You guys might be familiar of SEO, search engine optimization, but a very large kind of black hat industry is negative SEO. And so one of the things you can do is actually intentionally target your competitors with known things that would trip fraud, or like in this case, detection. So if you're doing SEO, you would do, let's say, 2 million backlinks from really bad sites or directories intentionally to one of your competitors, so that then Google sees them and devalues them or deranks them or blacklists them. And so you're starting to see this now with the leader playlists and playlists that are targeting specific catalogs, intentionally designed to get caught, so that way they can sort of hurt the competitor's catalog. And so we are seeing fraud around that type of activity. That is definitely something that we look for, and it is also something we've identified, but it is happening for sure. I just thought that was interesting. Someone brought that up. I'm guessing they've been a victim of it, because it's not something you think about till it happens to you, typically.
Got it. So here's a sort of a follow-up question on that. You know, can a consumer, let's say a subscriber to a music subscription service, can they generally review, to the extent they might do that, can they review their own DSP user, you know, their own user data to see usage and times used? And, you know, given some of the things that you illustrated as far as, you know, people looking to target accounts at certain times, do you think that is useful at all? Like if users are flagging their own accounts for suspicious data?
I'm not sure if you can through DSP, like look at your history. Maybe you can on some. but also like it's a huge consumer educational lift to say, hey, everyone should feel empowered to go check their own history and make sure that it lines up with their own recollections of what they listen to, especially in like a world where you're auto-served a lot of content. So
yeah, a
it might be
discovery
possible.
playlist. Like,
Yeah.
you tell me what you listen. Like, I couldn't even tell you what I listen to on my Discover Weekly. Like, I have no clue.
Yeah. So here's another question from Andre. How do you go about detecting fraud in streaming data that is controlled by the DSPs? Is it about trying to detect bots, increasing streaming counts? You know, a little bit more of a deep dive on some of the tactics that you use to detect fraud.
We're passed through. I mean, we're taking only first party data from DSPs. So there is no, like, if a DSP isn't a partner, we're not looking at their data. They're sharing it with us. Primarily, they're sharing two sort of big buckets. One is the actual user level transaction data, like the transaction data, but anonymized of user information. I don't need to know what Adam listens to. I just need to see the logs of the transactions, transactions of the streams from his account. But we can anonymize away the account name and the individual behind the account. We also want to see how they interact. Each account interacts with the streaming service itself. So like, what path do you follow to get from A to B, from the home screen to the song you listen to? Because there's all sorts of interesting stuff that comes from the like user attributes and characteristics. So we've talked about battery life and whether the gyroscope moves, but also like our data scientist team found one interesting thing where one pattern that showed up was that it was taking like I think 11 clicks for a particular script that was running. It was very clearly a bot. It was taking 11 clicks to get from the home screen to a song to play it, which is just abnormal. If you think about how you navigate through a DSP, if you're every single time taking precisely 11 clicks to get to queuing up that next song. And what it showed to us was that there was a script running that had a very specific set of instructions, which was go to home screen, click on the search bar, enter the search term, press enter, click onto the artist, click onto the album, scroll down, click onto the song, sort of so on and so forth. And that was the script of the bot, which is super interesting. So those two are the sort of first party buckets that we look at. And then third party data that we pull in, touring schedules, social sentiment. Good example might be like when Fleetwood Mac blew up because of the fellow on TikTok drinking ocean spray on the skateboard. Moments like that where the entire demographic of who listens to a particular artist or song shifts in an instant are really useful data points to pull in to make sure that something that looks like an aberration in the data actually isn't. It's just we didn't realize what had happened outside of the DSP that catalyzed all of that velocity. So we also look at some third-party data to try to supplement our own modeling.
So here's a question from Stephen. How can we be certain that the effort to prevent fraud won't go too far and utilize this domain as a way to silence or censor marginalized groups, emerging artists? Is this a possibility that's kind of baked into the stream fraud or the solution process already?
I mean, we're not into censorship. We don't actually take the action of removing anything. We give the streaming services the data they need to know who's defrauding their system. Like these are low-level bot networks. These are the accounts that have been hijacked. These are the accounts that we think are paid bots. These are the specific accounts that are causing the most damage in terms of like, you might have fraud that causes small amounts of damage and you might have, a couple users that perpetrate a lot more. So prioritizing like which actions they might want to take first, that's part of what our product helps them do. But we do not actually take the action of like, resetting passwords, or we might give recommendations like a hijacked account. Like those people probably don't know their accounts are hijacked. Like you should reset and restore their accounts. Like there's certain things that we might recommend, but we aren't censoring anybody. We want artists to do well. We want artists to have a following. It's just about making sure that there aren't people out there trying to like fraudulently ramp stream counts up and take money from artists. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, like it does not help any, like these bots and bad actors are not helping independent artists. So I don't think it's anything. We're not concerned with censorship. I haven't seen anything we do that would censor them.
Yeah, I think the question, to interrupt, I think the question might have been like similar to the hostile takeover thing before. Like, are you seeing anything? Are you seeing attempts by others to use streaming fraud for their own purposes of like silencing something? Like somebody wants to silence a certain creator and they're using streaming fraud to create an issue around that is like a backdoor way of censoring something. I don't know that I know you said before you've seen hostile takeover type of stuff directing at positioning somebody else in a negative light, but yeah, I think the asker of the question is curious if that's a behavior you've seen up where it's like directed at a censorship or trying to curtail someone.
I think it's easy to see when it's happening. Like, not easy. We can detect when it's happening. We can detect when there's things like that occurring. I would say that their incentive for why they're doing it, I couldn't even pretend to. I have no idea. Maybe I have no idea if censorship's on their mind, but that's we can detect it, but I don't know what their actual underlying incentive is for it, or who's paying them, or why they're doing it.
Got it. Okay, so here's another question also from Stephen. How can members of the music community help from their perspectives, whether they're artist managers, songwriter managers, artists and songwriters themselves, producers, labels, rights holders, agents, other creators? What can various stakeholders in the music business do to help?
My view is it's a great question. I think it starts here, right? We're all on this call. We're having a conversation. I haven't seen this conversation in many other places around the industry. So a huge shout out to Music Biz for being early and being on it. But the reality is, I think like it's about sort of having this discussion and acknowledging that there actually are solutions. They just need to be implemented. And that's sort of where we hope to come in. We promise this wouldn't be a shameless self-promotional webinar, and it would be informative. So I won't go too far deep down the sales pitch, but if you're in the industry and you think this is important and you've encountered it yourself and you've felt the pain point of it, say something, because we want to hear it. You feel free to send us a note privately. We're always interested in sort of your own anecdotal stories of what you've encountered, and we're happy to bring that forward when we have discussions with partners about why they should be considering a third-party platform provider of fraud detection services. So don't be shy about reaching out to us either. We're happy to keep it anonymous, or just don't share the details of particular artists and accounts, but just the anecdotes themselves are really helpful in, and we can bring that forward too.
Got it. Let's see. Another question. To your knowledge, to the extent you can say, has there ever been an error regarding, making a determination that an account was a bot, or, let's say otherwise, engaging in fraudulent activity, and that turned out not to be the case, that it was legit?
Yeah, I think if you asked our data science team what keeps them up at night, it's false positives. And I think that would be the case for every internal team at every streaming service as well, right? Like the last thing you want to do is punish someone who has, let's call it a unique listening pattern or behavior. And, we've all probably streamed a song that we've fallen in love with more times than we'd be comfortable telling the world. And if that shows up in the data, we certainly don't want you punished for it. So I think false positives are, as big of a fear for us as anything. And that's why, we employ the team that we do, and we work really hard to sort of test and back test models and make sure that we're only capturing what's, with a high degree of confidence fraud. I guess one thing we didn't, because in the product it doesn't show up, but like when we categorize sort of different actions that should be taken and different sort of groups of users, DSP might want to intervene with, there's sort of a third bucket, which is this doesn't quite look right, but we definitely don't want to recommend an action yet group. And so if over time watching a group of a case, let's call it, we see that it falls neatly into this is a bot or this is a stolen account or something else, then we can make that recommendation to take action against it. But for a long time, if it doesn't sort of categorize well with confidence, we're not going to recommend an action to avoid false positives.
Got it. Okay, we have time, I think, for one more question. So, to the extent you can say, and of course, broadly based, what do you see the DSP community largely as a whole doing themselves to address these issues of stream fraud?
I think that they're doing everything they can. Like I would say there's two buckets. There's people that are trying to do stuff, and then people that just haven't maybe had the resources to do things yet. And so I don't think anyone's thinking, oh, there's no fraud here. I've sat with DSPs and they've shown me the fraud on on the website. They're showing me where the fraud is, like not even on the back end of the database. They're searching per terms of this makes no sense, this makes no sense, this makes no sense. And so I think that there's recognition that fraud exists. I think one of the limitations is that if you're building on your own siloed data set, it's really difficult to be better than these fraudsters at it. I think you need a sort of third-party trusted source that can, without the PII, identify this nuanced level of fraud. I think that's exactly what we aim to build and are building and delivering now. And I think that I think they're trying. I think everyone's trying to fight this problem themselves. And I think that what we're trying to do is sort of say, hey, look, your guys' like business is delivering and being the best at delivering great content to end users and being the best at fraud detection. We can do that and make it accretive to your business without pulling all those resources from you. It's a better for you to like pool with everybody else towards having this industry standard than everyone individually trying to own their own data centers or manage, the fraud detections themselves. And I think you see that in every industry, like with banking, with Verifin. These banks have detection systems internally, and then they still send all their data to like a Verifin for money laundering and sort of fraud detection analysis. Like we want to be that for the industry. And I think that, so I guess the answer to your question is they're trying. I think that hopefully we can help them all succeed at a higher level, and people who don't have a service yet, or they don't have this maybe built yet, we can offer them the ability to sort of detect fraud without having to deliver so many internal resources to doing so. So we think it's a good thing for the industry as a whole. And I think that having conversations like this is, like, as Morgan pointed out, the first step to kind of discussing it.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you. I don't know, Henrik, did you, we have 1 minute left. Did you want to jump in for any closing remarks?
Only thing I want to say is just to extend my thanks and our thanks from the Music Biz side again for y'all being here today. Appreciate your time, your expertise. I know I learned some things, so I know folks in the audience definitely did as well. And thank you all for being here today. Excuse me, and taking a part in the conversation, the Q&A. And Adam, great job. Thank you so much for moderating the discussion as well.
Great. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to email Morgan and or Andrew, morgan@beatdap.com and andrew@beatdap.com. It's in the chat window, but it's spelled BEATDAPP. So again, morgan@beatdap.com, andrew@beatdap.com for any questions that we didn't get to, or if you otherwise want to reach out and talk to either of these gentlemen. Thank you again, everybody, for a really engaging conversation today, and wishing you all the best for the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.